receivers right now I have at 39, wide receiver 39. So I am, as a Giants fan, I am cautiously optimistic about the situation. I have been a very big Daniel Jones supporter. I do think the Giants have been the dumbest franchise when it comes to developing a quarterback. They just have no talent. And when I started looking into Malik Nabers, I actually feel more comfortable with him now as an upside middle round receiver. Now, I just did a draft with a bunch of other experts in the industry, and the one thing I noticed is that Neighbors went super early, like round 6, and I'm not into him there. Like, I don't know if I feel comfortable yet. I need to see the camp reports. Of course, it's May. It's very early. Now, the draft pedigree's there, but even if you, and this is kind of something we'll talk about with Marvin Harrison, but if you dive into just the last few seasons, the top 10 wide receivers, it hasn't been a slam dunk for fantasy football. So, of the 5, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith are the 5 receivers drafted in the top 10 since 2001. You have to go all the way back to 2017. And that draft class was awful. That was John Ross, Corey Davis, Mike Williams. None of those guys were good for fantasy football their rookie season. So that doesn't help. So if you just look at the most recent 5 top 10 wide receivers drafted, they averaged 13.6 PPR points per game and were the wide receiver 19 on average. That's, okay, low end wide receiver 2 numbers. But that also includes Jamar Chase, which was 18 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 5. Only Jalen Waddle was top 12 outside of that. So you're more likely to get a low-end wide receiver 2 to high-end wide receiver 3. And I am a little optimistic about the outlook, but Daniel Jones has yet to establish a true connection with a receiver, not because of his fault, because of injuries, right? If you just go back to when he got into the league in 2019, go look at the stats for Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, and Darius Slayton. He had 3 wide receivers. 2 of them are averaging 14 fantasy points per game, and they had another guy averaging double-digit fantasy points per game. His rookie season was very good. And then you start looking into the follow-up seasons. And once again, Sterling Shepard barely plays. I believe that season, Sterling Shepard stayed healthy that year. He averaged 13.4 PPR points per game. The next season, Shepard gets hurt, and he was out for a bunch of games. Kenny Golladay was out for a bunch of games. And Darius Slayton has kind of been his number 1 de facto for God knows how long. And, I'm sorry, I like Darius Slayton, but he is not a number 1 receiver. And if he's leading your receiving core in targets every year because everybody gets hurt, I would like to see what he can do when he has a true alpha on the field at all times. And so in the first 4 seasons with Daniel Jones, his number 1 receiver that played, at least a handful of games, averaged 12.8 PPR points per game. That's like a high-end wide receiver 3 numbers. So that's where I feel comfortable right now. I have him as a borderline wide receiver 3 for now. I think he's going to get overdrafted because he's a top 6 pick. And I just historically know that just because he's a top 10 wide receiver doesn't mean shit. Doesn't mean he will be a top 24 wide receiver. It's in the data. So I think Brian Thomas's situation, even though he has much tougher targets to compete with, I do believe that not only is his quarterback, but the offense will throw more and be more confident in their quarterback at least. So I feel like, that's why I lean Thomas. But you're leaning Neighbors right now over Thomas, it sounds like?
To start, I pretty much kept them in the same order for the 4 guys that I have in my top 60. I kept them in the same order that the NFL valued them. But again, I see that changing based on the fact that I think that people are going to overpay for Neighbors. They're going to underpay for Thomas, and I will probably move Neighbors down. I think the better receiver of the 2, all things being equal, might be Malik Nabers. There were some experts that had Neighbors ranked over Marvin Harrison Jr. So when you have experts that are smarter than me and possibly you that do football for a living that see that, you kind of have to put some credence in it. So if Nabers really is the 1A or 1B to Harrison Jr., I think I've got him. That's why I've got him ranked slightly higher. Like you said, the situation is going to play out where Brian Thomas has more opportunity to catch good passes from Trevor Lawrence. Malik Nabers, he might run into the Bill Belichick situation, right? Where they say, we're just not going to let this kid beat us. They're going to have to run it against us, or they're going to have to throw it to Darren Waller, who probably won't ever play football again. So there's a good chance that there is nobody else to throw to. It'll be Malik Nabers and the 17 wide receivers that the Giants have that don't play good football. So right now I have him higher. He will not. When we release our rankings just prior to draft season, I can almost bet right now that Brian Thomas will be higher than Malik Nabers on my list.
Yeah, and that's how I have it too. I agree with you. I think the Giants' weapons now with Nabers on there is an underrated unit. Like Wan'Dale Robinson is not going to get you, any air yards. He is a low A dot slot guy, but he is a very electric guy with the ball in his hands. I think he's a great safety valve, move to change type slot receiver. Jalen Hyatt has shown flashes to be a great deep threat. Now, if you give us an alpha number one like Malik Nabers, you're now changing the whole landscape of this offense. So I think Malik Nabers will have an opportunity to be the alpha in this offense.